This week on Act Out, a special two-part episode that takes a look at how U.S. empire operates in two of its latest and long-standing efforts to terrorize and oppress foreign peoples, trample self-determination, and whitewash hearts and minds at home. Recently returned from trips to Venezuela and Iran, Kevin Zeese and Dr. Margaret Flowers sit down with me to discuss what U.S. imperialism looks like from the front lines, and how the people the U.S. targets are not only wise to these tactics, but they have no intention of submitting. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I walk next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Today we have a special show for you, a two-part episode that highlights the ongoing imperialist shitstorms that were whipping up in Iran and Venezuela. And although these two nations are completely culturally different, exist half a world away from each other with wildly different histories, their present has one very big problem in common: U.S. empire. As you watch today's episode, you'll notice how this shared present manifests in similar ways in these two very different nations, via such tactics as coercive measures, the internationally illegal practice of economic warfare, and how a people once wise to the imperial trappings of the U.S. resolutely hold on, all the more tightly, not only to their culture, but to their threatened autonomy. So first, we sit down with Kevin Zeese, co-director of Popular Resistance, to talk about the escalating campaign against Venezuela, how people there perceive and understand these attacks, and what folks here in the States are doing to stand up to their imperialist government. Take a look.
They really loved having people of the United States there. But the society is very well educated on imperialism, and they understand the U.S. wants their oil. I was once on a cable car that goes up to from the downtown to the mountains, the neighborhoods, which are poor communities in the mountains. And we were waiting for the next cable car, and an older woman came up to our group. It was about 8 people we had with us. And she said, she talked to our person, found out we were Americans, and she said, tell your president, I know you want our oil, but treat us with respect, and no, there's no invasion. And she was like, whoa, okay, that was interesting. Yeah. But as far as imperialism goes, they're well educated. They are not interested in being under U.S. thumb. They remember what it was like pre-Chavez, and how large parts of their population were treated as non-humans. Mm-hmm. We went to one of the largest barrios in Caracas, 1.5 million people. Wow. And in that barrio, which is just a poor neighborhood, it didn't look that poor, to tell you the truth. It reminded me of New York City. But anyway, they called it a barrio. And they were like, this population of 1.5 million people were not even on the maps because they got no government services pre-Chavez. Wow. Now you drive to those communities, you see dental, you see hospitals, you see schools. We went to an area that used to be petroleum company land, and they have a whole new school. And they have a whole area of greenhouses. Wow. 17 tons of greenhouses grown in this urban farm. And they have an area of rabbits. They're growing rabbits for protein. They want to give rabbits to people's homes so they can all reproduce rabbits and create their... It's like, and it turns out there's actually a Ministry of Urban Agriculture.
Wow. Imagine that.
25% of their food comes from urban agriculture now. They want to get up to 50%. Wow. And we saw not just that one in the barrio, we saw another one that was in downtown Caracas, big buildings, 15, 17, 18, 20-floor store around it. And there was a big oval, multi-acre farm in the middle of all that. And there were people, it was planting time. They were planting, various vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, all in this big round urban garden. Wow. And people are so proud to show their pictures of their balcony garden. It's like become like this kind of resistance move, this resistance economy where they are going to grow their own food and be independent because they're so proud of their independence. Right. And they're so aware of imperialism that when you had the United States attack their electrical grid, as we did multiple times, attacks came from Houston and Chicago to destroy their electrical grid. They tracked it back. And the people of Venezuela did not loot in the darkness. despite the economic stress that has been on them for years because of the U.S. economic war and because of the oil price drop. They were still not looting. And when we asked people why, and then we got two reasons. One was because they knew this was an effort by the United States to create chaos, an excuse to come in militarily. And they didn't want to give that excuse. In fact, what they did is they unified. They got more solidarity, and they worked together to solve their problems. You know, as far as necessities for people, we saw very easy access to food. We saw vegetable stands and fruit stands full of food. We saw the boxes that are distributed by the CLAP program, which provides the essentials for kitchens on a monthly or biweekly basis, depending on your neighborhood, for 15 cents a box. And that goes to 6 million families. Each family is 3-4 million. That's 20 million people getting those out of a population of 30 million. Yeah. So they're providing food for virtually free for 2/3 of the population. That's pretty amazing. And so the essentials are being met, but there is a problem. I mean, I don't want to minimize the problem. There is a real problem. The economic war is creating hyperinflation. It's a combination of various factors that does it, but part of it is that Wall Street sets the value of the bolivar versus the dollar, and when they do that, that creates an opportunity for speculation and black market. And so, you know, it's a challenging situation for the government to handle. But the inflation seems to be getting under control. Who knows how it's a fragile situation, so it may not last. But in the last couple months, it's been getting under control.
Even with the latest sanctions?
Even with the latest sanctions, but the latest sanctions are very serious. They really elevated the problems. But at the same time, Venezuela is getting used to putting in place the solutions the best they can. They're developing other relationships with other countries. They're trading oil for non-dollars. They're creating their own petrodollars. So they're getting creative in trying to solve problems. It's not easy, but they are doing the best. And it's kind of amazing, even with this economic war going on and this economic crisis that has really shrunk their economy significantly to a depression type moment, of loss of GDP. Even with that, they have been able to build 2.5 million homes from the poorest Venezuelans. And among those poorest Venezuelans are hundreds of thousands, some say millions actually, of Colombians who've fled Colombia and come to Venezuela. And they're giving them homes. Yeah. Venezuela is.
And I want to ask you about the relationships with other countries aspect, because there was recently we responded to Russian troops being there by saying Russia should get out of Venezuela, which is hilarious. But that's kind of an interesting aspect here, because it seems that Russia and China are both kind of like the big brother in the background that are like, don't mess with Venezuela. So in terms of military, I know that we're just hoping that by hitting the electrical grid, by hitting them with sanctions, that the people will rise up and just overthrow the government.
That's what the goal is.
But, that doesn't seem to be happening at the rate that we would like to see it happen.
That's right.
So with regards to a military intervention, especially with players like Russia and China, do you think that's likely?
I think a military intervention would be a disaster for the United States. It would be a disaster for Venezuela too, but it would be a trap the United States wouldn't be able to get out of, and it would cost trillions of dollars. Just like we spent 7 or 8 trillion in the Middle East since 9/11. The reality is Venezuela is 6 times as large as Iraq. It has a military of 200,000. It has a National Guard and police. It has, since Trump started talking about military attack, they've escalated their civilian militia. The People's Militia is now 2 million people, armed and trained. I told that to Colonel Ann Wright. She said, that's bigger than the U.S. military. And it's not a simple Venezuela also has anti-aircraft weapons that are very sophisticated. They've just installed them, and so they won't have the air cover. U.S. won't have the air cover in a much more jungle terrain, and that's going to be very dangerous for a U.S. or Colombian or Brazil invasion. It would be a disaster for everybody, and it'd be a quagmire for the United States, and probably another defeat. The U.S. was defeated in Syria by the Syrian government, by the Russians, by Iranians that came to their aid. You'd see the same kind of thing. So even without Russia and China, when we met with President Maduro, who was very kind to give us 90 minutes and we were lucky to see him. I can explain that in a second, but because of our timing change. But he was very clear. He wants peace.
Yeah.
He wants dialogue. He's offered to meet with Trump, but we are an independent country, he says. We are not going to give up our sovereignty. We're not going to be dominated by the United States, and we're prepared for war if that's necessary. We don't want war, he says,
but we're going to defend
but
ourselves.
we are going to defend ourselves. And so they're ready for war if that's necessary. It won't be a good sight for anybody. It'd be a big mistake.
Yeah, and so speaking of which, when you met with Maduro, what was, how was he feeling about the situation? He
knows that the people understand U.S. imperialism because they do incredible political education. I can tell you about that too. There's amazing stuff about that. But they do. Venezuela does incredible political education. People have an understanding of U.S. imperialism, and everyone we talk to, when you start discussing the situation, it goes back to imperialism very quickly. They're aware of what's going on. Maduro was surprisingly relaxed, and he started asking for questions, and he spoke for 60 minutes. But he spoke well, and he started with explaining the electrical attack.
Yeah.
He said that was just the moment they had discovered how it occurred. The brain of their electrical system was built in Houston, and the attack came from Houston and Chicago.
Yep.
There were also electromagnetic attacks and physical attacks in Venezuela by, I'm sure U.S.-funded mercenaries doing it. Whenever they would make progress, there was another attack. So it was a constant back and forth battle. And still within a week, they got the electricity back on. There's another attack since then, and they got it back on again. So this is in the playbook of U.S. imperialism. They've used it in other countries. They trained the opposition in these tactics. There's documents that show that. So it's not a surprise that the U.S. is doing this. But he's very confident in his people, and he believes in the power of popular movements.
Yeah.
Because popular movements remove the United States.
Exactly.
Remove the oligarchs from power.
Yeah.
And popular movements have won them election after election almost consistently. They lose some elections because it's a real democracy. I was there for the presidential election. I saw how they vote. It's a very sophisticated election system, and very much protects the right to vote, which is a constitutional right there, unlike here. So Maduro is very confident in his people. He was very confident that they were ready for whatever came, and he was impressed by the solidarity the people showed, and he wants the popular movements in the United States to recognize the truth about Venezuela, and because he thinks we can make a difference, that we can actually influence the direction of our government. He has probably more confidence in our governments responding to the people than we do, but he thinks that popular movements can make a difference. He wants solidarity with the people and with the popular movements in the United States. And I think we owe that to them. Yeah. I think that we have a responsibility in the United States to stand up against our militarism, our imperialism, the coercive economic measures, which people call sanctions, but they are coercive economic measures. Coercive measures are illegal under the UN and under international law. So he's, I think, getting more and more confident and getting more and more popular as the U.S. attacks. People are unifying. We talked to people in Venezuela who are critical of Maduro, sometimes from a left perspective, that he's not put in place enough socialism. Because, accusing Venezuela of failing because of socialism is kind of a laugh, because 70% of their economy is capitalist.
Right.
They're not a socialist. They're striving toward, it's a Bolivarian process. And so it's a process to get there. They're still a capitalist country. And so it's funny to say they're failing because of socialism. People on the left, actually, in Venezuela say they're failing because they haven't put enough socialism. Right. But the people who criticize are saying that's not the important issue now. The important issue is keep the United States out. So they're rallying around, creating solidarity around Maduro. It's the opposite of what the U.S. wants. Rather than coercing people to change governments, it's coercing people to come together around their government. The protests for the opposition, if you look at the pictures of the protests, the opposition, it's a very light-skinned crowd. Right. Very well-dressed crowd. It's the wealthier class, and usually they're held in wealthy neighborhoods. They don't usually go to the neighborhoods of bigger populations. That Maduro has these mass crowds. We went to one protest, anti-imperialist protest, and I don't know if we were in the middle or not, but we looked to the back, we couldn't see the end. We looked to the front, we couldn't see the end. It was just 100,000 plus people. It was massive. And they do have deep political education. I just wanted to mention this a little bit because I so loved. We were in the audience of a TV show it's the most popular TV show in Venezuela. It's a 5-hour show
Wow.
each week. And they have music, dancing, they have comedy, little snippet comedic shows, and they have a deep political education. It's headed by the MC of the show is the president of the National Constituent Assembly.
Wow.
He was actually in line. It was him or Maduro who was going to take the place of Chavez. So he's a very high level, probably the second most powerful politician in the country, and he does this show. And he's a very funny guy, very aggressive, and criticizing the opposition. Guaido is the butt of jokes, but the centerpiece of the show with all the music, and the music is great. You know, there's a whole section of military in fatigues. They're all dancing, you know, the military. You know, it's crazy. The centerpiece of the show, though, is he has these billboard, these sections up with index cards on them, 80 index cards. Bad news, good news, fake news, the electrical attack. 80, he goes through, he stands next to the board and takes a card and talks about it. 80 stories of news he goes through. And that's where Guaido gets, and the Trump administration, John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, they all get mocked terribly there, deservedly. And it's just a really amazing political education. And Chavez had a show like that, too.
Which also speaks to the idea, I mean, Maduro's a former bus driver. It also speaks to that idea of having people from the people.
Yes.
Not like the top-down, what we have here, like nobody runs for president, or nobody wins the presidential race here that hasn't already gotten cozy with Wall Street, that has ever been a bus driver. I mean...
When you go to the mausoleum with Chavez's remains, they have a museum, and they show where he grew up. Poverty.
Yeah.
You know, he came from the people. And, you know, when he was in the military, at one point, he actually toured the country with another officer and saw the poverty, how widespread it was. And it was very widespread.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about 2/3, 75+%. I mean, you know, poverty at that time. So he saw that was the issue. And so when he got elected, he made that the priority, was to deal with the... And Maduro's continued that.
Yeah.
As I said, even during this economic war, they're providing clap boxes to 6 million families. They're providing housing to 2.5 million of the poorest. So even during this economic war, and that's why they get elected.
Yeah, because they
actually take care of the necessities of the people, and they're connected to the people. And that was a problem, I think, after the National Assembly election. I think that really woke up Maduro and his party to realize we got to get connected to the people. He almost didn't get elected the first time after Chavez appointed them, and it had the opposite effect of the opposition. The opposition winning the assembly was their undoing. They took down Simon Bolivar's
it laid bare their
picture and destroyed it, tried to destroy it. Someone took it and saved it, thankfully. They passed a law that was an amnesty law. Amazing amnesty law they passed. One of the first laws they passed, listing all of their crimes since 2001. Since Chavez was, and we get amnesty for terrorism. We get that for undermining the economy. Just like a list of all their crimes they want amnesty for. Nice admission. It was like multiple pages long.
Here, everyone's just like, I don't know, I never did that.
Of course, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't pass that. That's not going to happen. But it was basically an admission.
Wow.
And so, but then they followed that up with stupidity. I mean, they got involved in these violent protests in 2014 and 2017, where they put up these barricades. They were charging people to go home, like a toll. They were, putting up wires that people couldn't see, so a motorcyclist would get. And they burned. 28 people were burned, Afro-Venezuelans. I think 9 to death. So when they did those kinds of violent barricades, they couldn't win elections after that. And so when Maduro ran for re-election a year ago, the U.S. pressured the opposition not to run any candidates or not to participate. One candidate did come. Henry Falcon was a legitimate opposition candidate. He put forward his views: bring the IMF back, tie the Bolivar to the dollar, embrace the United States. He put that out as his agenda, and he lost, by a lot.
Which again speaks to the power of an educated populace,
exactly.
Really knowing what they want and what they don't want.
Exactly, and even with the boycott, they still almost had 50% turnout, and Maduro got 9 million votes. out of 30 million population. That's 30 million includes kids. That includes non-voters. So he had a very high percentage return of registered voters, higher than either Obama or Trump. We call him a dictator, but he had a high turnout.
Well, it speaks to the other. I mean, of course, Venezuela has oil, and we want that. But the other side of why we want to, really oppress Venezuela is because it's the threat of a good example. Like, look at, even though it's not perfect, and like you said, people have issues with Maduro, just like anybody would in a well-formed system. It's that idea of, oh my gosh, look at what happens when you do put yourself behind the people and you really care about their needs and you address those needs. We can't have that spreading.
Exactly. And it was a good example. Before the oil prices fell, it was a very good example. Their economy was doing well for the people. I mean, people's literacy went way up. Poverty went way down. Healthcare went way up. Housing went way up. Everything, the indicators were all so positive. Of course, the drop in oil prices, and this has been a problem for Venezuela since the 1920s. That was a problem in the economic war. On top of that was a big problem, and so they had their challenges. But people realize their government is trying to improve their lives, and they still feel it. And even in an economic war, they are still putting the people first. That goes a long way. And so they boycotted the election because they knew they couldn't win it. The U.S. knew they couldn't win it. The violence and the actions of the assembly, it was obvious who they weren't for the people. And so they thought better, let's boycott it and say it's not a legitimate election.
Of course, which still is the overwhelming understanding here in the U.S. for Americans.
And is the overwhelming lie.
Right.
One of many.
Yes.
And the lies are very obvious. I said we were lucky to see Maduro, and we wouldn't have seen him if the American Airlines hadn't canceled their flights. And they canceled their flights because they said
Thanks, American.
Thanks, exactly. They said it was unsafe for pilots because there was widespread civil unrest, and Americans could be arrested at any time for no reason. And so because of that, we're not going to fly to Venezuela. We don't have to protect our pilots. So all our flights got canceled. We had to stay an extra day, and that was the day we met with Maduro.
Yeah, and that was so dangerous.
And we went outside that day and filmed the unrest. We saw kids having ice cream, families walking in parks, people walking down walking streets and shopping and having lunch. We went to the rich neighborhoods, the poor neighborhoods. We were in the barrios. There was no civil unrest anywhere to be seen. So the obvious lies were just like, it's not even like gray telling the truth. It's like white and black. Yeah. They're going to lie. Completely lie.
It's the mayhem of a good example happening.
Yes.
So finally, where are we at right now? What's going on? Obviously, this is an issue that you work on a lot. So what's going on right now to shift public understanding of this and to combat the imperialist move by the U.S.?
Well, right now at this moment, I'm talking to you.
Sweet.
Which is part of the shift.
Good.
To help people educate. Whenever we have an opportunity to talk to larger audiences of people, or even smaller audiences, I would tell you the same thing if I was just without Cameron. But we want to get the truth out. And that's what the Venezuelan people asked us to do when they saw us. We love you, tell the truth. So we're here telling the truth. That's one thing. I think education is the foundation of all, and there's so much misinformation here, there's a lot to correct. People have to understand that almost everything you hear is the opposite of the truth. Yeah. They have to suspect the source, and they need to go to other sources. There's a lot of good sources that you can get information. We cover on popular resistance. Mm-hmm. If you go to Venezuela on our page, you just search Venezuela, you'll find lots of information. We are constantly reporting what's the reality. Right. But people are doing more than that. We have to show solidarity in various ways. One is we want to see more people go down to Venezuela. We're working with groups in Venezuela in order to facilitate visits so that we want to have people who are health professionals go down and see the health situation. We want to have youth go down and see how youth are treated. We want to have people who are involved in agriculture see the agriculture. Just all this information is there. We want people to go see the democracy, because the democracy is pretty impressive. We can learn a lot from it. So that's another thing. Another thing we're doing is in the United States. We've already seen some protests. Yep. When we did the No NATO protest a week ago, Venezuela was part of that because NATO, for some bizarre reason, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is coming to Latin America with our Israel of Latin America, Colombia, which does all our dirty work, and they are becoming part of NATO. The U.S. is pushing Brazil to be part of it. One thing that Brazil and Colombia have in common is borders with Venezuela. I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
So we are, through protests, also getting the word out. So we write, we talk, we educate, and we're also very involved in protecting the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. We spent the night there last night. Other people have been there for the last 4 nights. The situation at the embassy is that diplomatic staff are being forced to leave the United States. They're supposed to be gone in 2 weeks. When they go, the opposition says they're going to take over the embassy. This is a building that Venezuela, the government, owns in D.C. And so we are there, and we're inviting others to join us. Just contact info@popularresistance.org, and we can respond to you about participating in that. We're going to be doing educational events, teach-ins from the embassy. Education, action, and mobilize to protect Venezuela and be in solidarity. The people of Venezuela are in solidarity. We need to be in solidarity with the people of Venezuela.
So again, what I find incredibly vital to note here is the disparity between the reality on the ground and how our media and our government present Venezuela to us. Furthermore, the power of an educated public. As Kevin told me, imperialism is everywhere. The understanding runs deep. And when that's the case, the propaganda drivel slides easily off the resolute shoulders of a people accustomed to fighting for freedom. This is far from our first fight in Venezuela, and while the oil is an undeniable draw, the threat of an autonomous Latin American nation that defies imperialist control in the name of human rights is terrifying. Our repeated attempts to turn people against their cultures, their history, and their systems, regardless of systemic flaws, does nothing but harden their resolve when the people see the U.S. for what it really is. Sitting down with Dr. Margaret Flowers, co-director of Popular Resistance, and discussing Iran, these themes echo loudly. So please be sure to check out that segment available at the link below, via the link in the show description, and of course via Free Speech TV.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been begging up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go. It's been too many years since you pushed and served my shove. I'm not a violent